Matt Walsh is a right-wing commentator who works for Ben Shapiro's website, The Daily Wire, and the other day on Twitter he posted this asinine shit. When you hear about quote-unquote mass graves in Canada, just know that those mass graves are called cemeteries, and there is nothing nefarious about them. This is one of the most absurd and destructive narratives the media has ever concocted. A little bit of background on what he's talking about. Recently, Indigenous groups in Canada have found mass graves containing hundreds and hundreds of Indigenous children. These mass graves were found at sites that used to be residential schools for Indigenous children who, by the Canadian government, essentially at the behest of the Catholic Church, were forcibly taken from their families, put into these schools, and were taught how to assimilate into white Canadian culture. And a lot of these schools were ran by the Catholic Church, who, to this day, has yet to acknowledge their involvement in the cultural genocide of Indigenous people in Canada. This spanned from roughly 1863 to 1998, affecting more than 150,000 Indigenous children in Canada. These residential schools were riddled with sexual, mental, physical abuse, and a lot of these children died due to the awful conditions in these schools. So, don't you find it a little odd that children attending residential schools died in mass and were put in pretty much unmarked graves at these residential schools? It's not normal to find hundreds upon hundreds of unmarked graves containing dead children in more than one place. But this is what people like Matt Walsh will adamantly defend because they like it when cultures that differ from white society are destroyed. They'll stand up for things like the Trail of Tears, which was essentially the United States' version of this, force the Indigenous people of this country to assimilate into our culture because this is our land now, and slaughter those that don't comply. And not to mention their sheer reverence for awful figures like Christopher Columbus. These people just love it when Indigenous people are forced to abandon their heritage, abandon their identities, and are forced to conform to a predominantly white society, because they view these groups as lesser, and feel that their culture and their heritage is superior, and thus everyone must assimilate. I guess you could call these kinds of people white supremacists. I know a lot of people hate that term because they feel it's thrown around a lot, but what else do you call a person who actively downplays the genocide of Indigenous people, defends the destruction of a culture that many non-white people partake in because they feel it is inferior to their own, which in this case we're talking about white culture? I feel the label suits them pretty well, in my opinion. What Matt Walsh is engaging in with the tweet that I read at the beginning of the video is genocide denial, plain and simple. And I see so many of his dumbfuck fans in the replies under the tweet saying stupid shit like, what happened to these kids wasn't murder? Yeah, sure. It totally wasn't murder. These kids totally weren't forcibly taken from their families, put into these residential schools with the most horrible conditions, under the care of some of the most awful people doing some of the most horrible shit to them, and they totally didn't die as a result of the awful conditions they were placed under. Oh wait, that kind of sounds like murder. And considering all of these kids were part of a specific group, it kind of sounds like genocide. His tweet garnered 11.5k likes at the time of recording this video, and sure, a lot of people in the replies are dunking on him, but the fact that that many people read this tweet and thought, yeah, that was a smart statement, what happened to these children totally wasn't murder and genocide, it's just utterly disturbing. It doesn't sound all that different from when Nazis try to downplay the Holocaust and say things like, well, those who were in concentration camps didn't exactly die at the hands of the Nazis, they just died from different factors. Oh, you mean the awful conditions that the Nazis placed these people under? Well, yeah, but, Anyways, Matt Walsh followed this tweet up with this. I stand by my point here, even if it makes you mad. The claims of quote-unquote genocide are entirely unfounded. This story is being deliberately misconstrued for nefarious reasons. If you're interested in the truth, here's a good read. And then he cites an article from The Federalist, which is a hyper-partisan right-wing website, with the headline, Anti-Christian Hysteria is Causing Church Burning. People might be next. I'm not going to give this article the time of day because I already know what it is. It's an attempt to steer people away from why this is happening in the first place, because Indigenous children were kidnapped in mass and died in the most horrible conditions because they were forced to assimilate into white Canadian culture. It's an attempt to make people not pay attention to that aspect of the story, but instead feel bad for the Catholic Church because some churches are burning down in response to the awful atrocities the church has committed throughout the decades in Canada. Don't feel bad for all those children who were kidnapped and all of those who died at the hands of the church, but instead feel bad for the evil institution behind all these horrid acts. Give me a fucking break. This is why I just fucking hate religion so much. Not people who practice religion, don't get me wrong, or at least normal people who practice religion, but rather religious institutions doing evil shit like this under the guise of, well, we're just spreading our beliefs. It makes people feel justified in doing shit like this. How many more pedophile priests have to be exposed before we're finally like, the Catholic Church is a pretty evil institution that has been evil for centuries now, and it's finally time to abolish this evil institution once and for all. I really don't want to sound like those edgy neckbeard atheists who are like, religion is so stupid, everyone who practices religion is so stupid, even though I'm agnostic, but still, at the same time, religion has had such a stronghold on this world for so long now, has hindered progress, has made people feel justified in doing horrible shit like what has gone on in Canada for so long. It's to the point where in some way, shape, or form, we need to address its hindrance on society. And I really don't have a solution. I don't know what the fuck you can do with so many evangelicals in this world. And I'm not saying abolish all religion either, because that would just be preposterous and impossible, and people should be free to practice whatever religion they like, but the people who do horrible things in the name of their religion has been a problem for so long now, and something needs to be done about these kinds of people. They're indoctrinated by evil institutions, and perhaps we should go after said institutions first. But until substantial change is made, if it ever even happens, all I can really say is fuck people like Matt Walsh, who are seemingly okay with genocide, white supremacist pieces of shit, and fuck religious institutions. That's all I have to say. Bye-bye.